Sarah Longwell is the executive director of the Republican Accountability Project, and she's the publisher of The Bulwark, or a publisher. And she's come out and said that, Donald Trump has only made his giant comeback because so many elected officials across the country have been supportive of him, basically. That they have validated him to his base, to Republican voters. She notes, just 1 week after the midterms, he entered the 2024 race, announcing his candidacy to a room of bored-looking hangers-on. Even his children weren't there. Security had to pen people in to keep them from leaving during his meandering speech. And now, of course, Trump is on his way to being the Republican nominee. So what happened between those 2 points? Republican elected officials came out and endorsed him. If there had been a wave of endorsements for Nikki Haley or for Ron DeSantis instead, then, according to Sarah Longwell, this Republican executive director of the Republican Accountability Project, Trump would not be the nominee. In fact, she says this outcome was not inevitable. So why did it happen? Well, she writes, the reason is simple. Republican elites don't understand their voters. They spent 8 years making excuses for Trump and supporting him at every turn, sending the clear signal that this was his party. They spent nearly a decade saying that he was a persecuted martyr and the greatest president in history. It's frightening but not surprising that their voters thus think he's the only man for the job. Yeah. Meanwhile, Alyssa Farah Griffin, the former White House communications director under President Trump, we're hearing from Republicans here, said that Nikki Haley's strong showing in South Carolina on Saturday should be a 5-alarm fire for the Republican Party. I thought this was interesting. When Joe Biden won that race by 96% 2 weeks earlier in the Democratic primary, the New York Times indicated that his 4% loss, the 4% of people who did not vote for Joe Biden, indicated that he was weak. That was the New York Times take on it. When Trump lost 40% of the vote in South Carolina, the New York Times proclaimed that he had wiped out Nikki Haley, that he had just mopped the floor with her. I don't think so. I think that, his 40%, almost 40, 39.5%, I believe it is, of South Carolina voters voted for Nikki Haley. I think that tells you that Donald Trump is going to be a very, very weak candidate in the general election. And, the question is, will Republicans eventually, the kingmakers in the GOP and the donors, will they eventually come to the conclusion that Trump can't win, that there's no way he can win, and stage an intervention between now and the Republican convention or at the Republican convention, number one? Or will the major donors of the party come to the conclusion that, Trump actually can win if we just throw enough money and support behind him? And then they just throw everything they have into it. And I don't know the answer to that question. I'm not sure that anybody does, how exactly this is going to play out. But this is, Farah Griffin is pointing out that, if you can't get 40% of the vote, if Joe Biden had failed to get 40% of the vote in the New Hampshire or South Carolina or Nevada primaries, people would be writing articles right now saying he's got to leave the race. If Joe Biden had failed to get 20% of the vote, 10% of the vote, people would be writing articles saying he's got to leave the race. So Biden wins by 96%, and it's like, well, that shows some weakness. Trump wins by 60%, and it's like, whoa, this guy is kicking Nikki Haley, a minute ago. So we'll see where all this goes, but keep an eye on it. This is going to get interesting.